This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and welcome to the Gentlemen's Assembly. Today, we're having a group discussion, a medieval roundtable, featuring author Jeb Smith, the author of Missing Monarchy. And I'd like if everybody could just start to introduce themselves, starting with Jeb Smith, since he's our featured guest.
Well, thank you for having me on again. My name is Jeb Smith. I'm the author of 4 books. My most recent, as was stated, is Missing Monarchy, Correcting Misconceptions about the Middle Ages, Democracy, and Liberty. And my most popular book, bestseller right now, would be Defending Dixie's Land, What Every American Should Know About the South and the Civil War. And if you're interested in my articles, I'm always publishing articles. I just started up on LinkedIn, and so all the podcast articles, everything that I produce goes on there. It's a good way to follow me.
All right, then I guess I'll introduce myself. I am the owner of the Gentlemen's Assembly YouTube channel and Discord server. That's about it. My name is Jason.
I'll introduce myself next. I am a political theorist who runs a micronation, which is based on my ideological principles, called Contradvania. I do infrequent blogs, and I guess that's about it for me.
I'll go next. I'm Ken, kind of an internet paleo-libertarian or ANCAP, and big fan of feudal history.
I'll go next. I'm Jeffrey. I've just been interested in politics and European history as a whole for the past 2 or so years. I thought it'd be really nice for me to listen in on someone who's written books about this stuff.
I'm Mad Cow. I'm a member of the Gentlemen's Assembly server. I'm a pretty plain Jane libertarian.
Wonderful.
All right, sounds good. I guess just to get started, Mr. Smith, is there anything you'd like to just kickstart? Why would you say the Middle Ages are awesome, whereas today is not so awesome?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. One, I would say, is their government, if we're talking focusing on political, I'm assuming, was to a large extent made up of consenting individuals in united whole. So you didn't have the antagonism that democracy brings. You didn't have to be politically active. You didn't have to fundraise for whoever you want in power. It was decentralized, so you're able to move around to find customs and politics that you agreed with that you found favorable, and so it was still very tribal during the Middle Ages. Kinship mattered a lot, and so you had all these local towns, villages, people living off the grid, living with people that they agreed with. So in the modern sense, it'd be somewhat, conservatives over here, libertarians over here, anarchists, liberals. Everyone had their own customs to live by, and they weren't forcing each other to live under rule. There was no blind obedience, at least in the modern sense, and it was a much freer world. If you're a libertarian or anarchist, I mean, there's large sections of land and area that were pretty much anarchies or very anarchical monarchism, very libertarian as well. And so there wasn't the rise of the professional state and centralization, which really began to occur in the 14th century. And so you don't have this regulatory body governing you, passing laws, and you had to worry about what your ruler is going to do. Back then, law stayed the same. It was ancient. Kings didn't have the power and lords to manipulate law or change it. So you had unchanging customs and laws that you would agree to, that you enjoy, and the political fighting and the concern, all the negatives that come with democracies and having a state over you, legislation didn't exist then, and that's definitely one of the most attractive features of the Middle Ages to me, as a libertarian anarchist type minded individual.
Yeah, that's a great summation. And also, before we get too deep, I wanted to mention Ken brought his book Missing Monarchy. He just got it, and
Nice.
he said it's great so far.
It's really interesting. It just arrived yesterday. I'm not far through it. but I'm really loving it so far. There's a lot of interesting insights that you wouldn't have thought of.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for buying a copy. And it is, especially at the beginning of the book, what I'm trying to do is correct the misconceptions about the king's function. Because a lot of people I talk to, since my book's been out, or Democrats that I try to be critical of democracy, they think the only alternative is a dictatorship. And so they'll say democracy is better than a dictatorship. And no one has really knowledge of the libertarian kings of the Middle Ages and how those political systems function. And even like King George and the absolutist monarchs weren't nearly as bad as we believe them to be. The he put on a 3% tariff on tea tax, and that caused a rebellion because that was so horrendous to have such a high tax. And then think of what we have today. So even the later kings were not nearly as awful as many people believe. And so that was the main thrust at the beginning of the book that I wanted to make.
Yeah, what I always like to say is that if absolute monarchy can be called absolute, then really we never left the age of absolutism. We just transitioned from absolute monarchy to this sort of bureaucratic absolutism that we have nowadays.
Right, yeah.
Very true. And also, during the time that America was under a king, we were only under, what was it, two kings maybe, right? There was King James, I know about that, and then there was also King George. But there wasn't much more than that, and over that period of time, King James was beloved. I mean, we named Jamestown after him. You could say we have Georgia, but that's hit and miss, I guess. But King George was a tyrant for his time, and it is good to know that some people have brought up in histories where they'll say reimagining the American Revolution, and they'll say, oh, it wasn't about them, just loving democracy or something.
Right.
And then they might get close sometimes. They'll say, oh, they were just a different form of nationalists. They thought they were a different identity or this or that. But if you do get into it, it is pretty highly tied to the tyrannical tax. And as you say, it's what would you? I'm trying to remember your wording. I'm trying to remember the wording. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Correct.
Yeah. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And that's where in many ways, the early colonies were being like the Middle Ages, rebelling against a king who's going over his authority, even if it's a slight little step or, whatever he did, you're rightfully supposed to throw off that king. As I quote, a famous pastor in South Carolina, I can't think of his name now. He said, King George has unkinged himself. He's no longer king. He doesn't deserve our oaths of fealty or whatever, our loyalty. So they were acting in many ways the same way a lot of the vassals and peasants did against kings who became tyrants during the Middle Ages. And today we have no option like that, which is why central powers are, sovereign, and we're all expected to obey, and we have no recourse for the progressive government expansion that goes on everywhere.
Also, the reason I wanted to say that progressives think the alternative to democracy is always a centralized dictatorship is because I believe I was listening to Hans Hoppe talk about this just recently. He said that without the right to social exclusion, private social exclusion, then the only alternative to a society that is forcefully inclusive would be an absolute dictatorship that has to kick everybody of differing beliefs out because of their own personal grievances, because they would have no other method of solving that because they can't privately exclude.
And I talk about that similar as equality. Anything, if you have to achieve equality, if that becomes the goal or the role of the government, it has to become totalitarian. There's no other way it could accomplish its mission. And as I point out, it becomes more unequal as the government gains all this authority and power and is able to force all these groups. It treats people differently, so you could never achieve equality in any way. totalitarians, really what their goal is, and they just look for different ways in which to achieve it, different avenues. And so I think, that's one of them that they use today.
I think democracy and representation, as you mentioned in the book, definitely has been a cover for state expansion over the years. And they justify things saying that they're doing it for the people, or
Right.
even that it's being done by the people, which is really not the case.
Right, yeah. From the first to the 14th century, it was kind of the rich merchant class and interest groups that wanted to make deals with the politicians of the day, which were kings, and they continually manipulated the people, raised taxes, put more obligation, which, as I mentioned, that's why in the 14th, 15th century, you had these huge revolts going on that you didn't have in the Middle Ages, because now all of a sudden representation came back with the Roman law returning. And then you get a collusion between the kind of the capitalists of the day and the central government of the day, which were kings who turned into monarchs. And we the people are definitely not represented as we were under kingship. We're no longer the priority. The government is, and whoever's back, we just kind of follow along. And that's one of the travesties of centralization and representative governments that are really, not doing what they should be, not representing the local level. They're just representatives for the national party at the local level to implement their agenda. It's not universal, but it's definitely the majority. So over time, it becomes a worse situation for us peasants.
It reminds me of this theory of the Neoreactionaries I was reading about formalism. And but before that, I was thinking about Jones Plantation, if you've ever listened to that or heard about that. It's basically a story.
Mississippi?
Well, it's a
Are you referring to the
story.
Larkin Rose, hypothetical?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Jones Plantation is like it's anarchist Larkin Rose's like fictional story, which is meant to represent the political ethic that coercion is unjustified, even if it's like prettied up in this sort of way, whether it be democracy or the justification of a slave owner to coercively take slaves, or
Right. The story in it is that this plantation master has all these slaves and they're not doing well. They're very rebellious and they're unruly, and he wants to get them to be more productive. So he gets this guy to come to his plantation. He's kind of a kooky guy, but everybody promises he'll make them listen the best that he can. And the first thing the guy does is he stands up on a stage and he says, "You are all free now. You are free to work as you will. You may stay here, you may leave. The issue is if you leave, another plantation might take you as their own slave, and we don't want that. So you definitely need to stay here. Also, we will have elections, and they will be between your former master and his cousin, and that will be your choices. Former master and his cousin. And they'll take over leading the plantation back and forth. And then it tricks everybody into believing, oh, well, we live in this great free democracy and I'm free. I'm allowed to do whatever I want. Well, I'm so happy that we live in a free society now. And
we're represented. We get to vote.
Yeah, represented. Yeah. And I was going to say, it reminds me of the neo-reactionary principle of formalism, where they believe that if there is real power, it should be formalized. And the way they believe in doing that is sometimes stock corporation type of governments, where you can see, which people or groups own however much of the government and see their influence on it. But it's akin to the monarchist idea too, because the monarch owns the government, therefore who's really in charge.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I mean, there's hidden anonymity in democracy that you can't really hold anyone accountable. And as I say in my book, you can replace the individual politicians, and that's the same thing. Everyone celebrates the will of the people. This guy was horrible. He's doing thing, see voting works, you can replace him. But the system behind that politician that got him elected, that's going to get the next one elected, you can't get rid of by the same method. So yeah, we don't really have choice, as you said. I don't know. The whole system needs to be scrapped. I'd like to hear more of neo-reactionaries' opinions on what they would plan to do to replace it and all that, to
Well,
get consent back.
I consider myself to be a neo-reactionary and a neo-feudalist here because, you know,
Mhm.
they're just both golden ideals. And I have to say that neo-reactionaries, their ideal would be to basically look at government lobbyists and the people who are bribing politicians
Okay, yeah.
and give them control of the government. And that might seem crazy, but
Yeah.
it would be honest. It would show
Mhm.
everybody who
Okay,
really
yeah.
controls the government,
Yeah.
who really funds it, who really makes the laws. And then after that, we can move towards a system that we actually want when we actually know who owns it.
I was going to
We,
say, how do you think the people would react if they found out and they discover, like the pharmaceutical companies are influencing us more than the people that they voted for? Do you think that lead to some sort of rebellion or rethinking of the system?
People would definitely uh, be upset about that, and people would probably, want that changed. But the good news about neo-reactionary beliefs is that they believe in patchwork. Patchwork is
Mhm.
basically the same ideal as under feudalism, you have your different lords, right?
Mhm.
And these patches would be like local, local governorships
Yeah.
where they lead their own territory and their goal is to maximize profit because if it's not public, then they're able to actually just focus on maximizing profit for themselves now, which
Yeah.
would mean growing these areas. It fixes the whole incentive system, number one, because it's not anonymous anymore. The
Hmm.
actions wouldn't be anonymous anymore. There's more accountability.
Hmm.
And if it's decentralized, then they actually have a good incentive system where it's like, if you're doing some type of insurance fraud or scam, you can't just keep, crashing your little franchises under a fake name
Right.
if
Yeah.
everybody knows what your real name is, and now you're allowed to just profit off from it. You can do anything you want to profit. And, the idea is that they would tailor it to be more towards the local people's wants and desires
Hmm.
and also get an influx of people because the very interesting thing about neo-reactionaries is they believe in the government as a type of real estate agency where
Hmm.
they're trying to sell land and get people to move in,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
that's the whole
Well,
purpose.
I mean that pretty much occurred in the Middle Ages, right? When you had a good lord who advertised his customs, and the peasants would say, "Oh, go over here when they meet people in town. This is what it's like over here." And when someone's a tyrant over here, everyone leaves. So there's that sort of that
Competition.
competition, which is
Yeah.
definitely going to help. And how decentralized do they
Oh,
desire, or have they mentioned that specifically? Or is it
they're
just
pretty
kind of
incredibly decentralized. I mean, some of them might believe in a Holy Roman Empire type of system
hmm.
where uh, it's not as decentralized as maybe the Hoppians are, where it's like, every town or
Yeah,
house is independent.
yeah.
But they do believe in like city states where it's like, maybe it's focused around a city area or
Hmm.
a metropolitan area.
Hmm.
But even in the Holy Roman Empire, there were small, knights' castles and
Right.
independent areas like that. So I don't think
And
they
one
even have anything. It's
one thing you mentioned, the difference, I think, between city politics and country politics. I think there's something about living in the habitation of a city that, I mean, it has to be because there's so many people interacting. You need more bureaucracy, you need more laws, and people become interdependent more. Whereas when they're out in rural areas, or dependent, they're more independent when they live out in the country. And I think that I'd love to see a deep study done on how that affected politics in the Middle Ages, because when the Lord in the castle in his rural setting, there's a very different mindset about the government compared to the towns, even at that time. So then, as the towns grew and merchants and money became more important, all the lords and the kings moved to the towns, and then obviously they're going to have more influence, and it's going to lead to more government expansion. But I'd love to see a deep study on that. To me, I'd prefer I always thought if I could control America and put it into my system as a appendix, the capital would be somewhere in the middle of nowhere. It wouldn't be in a big city. It'd be pretty much like a castle in the middle of America somewhere.
Wyoming or something.
Yeah, something like that. And and also move it around too, to avoid everyone coming to it, centralizing, power and stuff.
That is how the Holy Roman Empire did as well, where they had electors, and the electors could also be elected to be the Holy Roman Emperor, right? And then, the capital would move from this city-state to this city-state to
usually
wherever.
between Germany and Italy. And that's the thing, like the government kind of followed the king. So when the king's in Italy and his Italian states, he's kind of ignoring all of Germany, which is pretty much, has their local lords anyway. So it's not really a big deal. Then he comes back and then Italy's somewhat without a king. So very different.
Yeah. So there was no, centralization of power in Washington or whatever, where
Right.
they only have this area. It'd be more spread across, It could end up being something like, forget about DC entirely right now. Just trash it.
Yep.
Just give it directly to a state that, the president wants, I guess. Give it to the state that he lives in even. And then, you could have it, 1 week in New Hampshire, another week in, maybe not a week, but one election in New Hampshire, another in California, another in Florida, Texas.
That'd be interesting to see a president elected and he chooses where the capital is going to be, Probably put it in their home state a lot. That'd be kind of cool to see.
They probably would, and you'd get a more accurate, people would actually think about where they are now.
Something you might have.
Wait, where would legislator and governmental decisions be conducted though? Like, if we were not to do it in DC, would we be doing this in state capitals or directly where the president resides in these states?
They could have their own. Well, I mean, the capitals of states already have their own infrastructure built up. So
yeah, that was my main concern here, is that the capital has a lot of things that are dedicated to how the United States operates that a state legislative body just wouldn't have the capacity for.
But if the federal was shrunk down quite a bit, which I think the neo-reactionaries want, then you wouldn't need a lot of that infrastructure. I was about to mention to Patrick something I think he would appreciate in the Confederacy. They had the state capital and they had the federal capital, and purposely they were right down the same road, and the state capital was huge, very nicely decorated, all this, and the federal wasn't. It was kind of a reminder to those federal employees, the states are in charge here, not the federal government. And I like that.
Yeah, I love that. And
my idea wouldn't have a professional legislator anyway. And even in early America, they were representatives of the states, and the senators, they reside in their states, and they would gather once in a while to the Capitol. It wasn't like they lived there full time now, which gives them that mindset. I'm supposed to be continually legislating, passing laws is my job. Instead of when they're back in the States, it's like, I'm a representative of my state. I'm going to go to DC to represent my state. Now they're in DC and they're just another member of the federal government.
Right, that's true. And another thing that we aren't utilizing as a modern society is all of the technology we have now. And I even find this funny about people who say that they love democracy. If you ask them, well, why can't we have direct democracy? They'll immediately be like, oh, that's too much. We can't just count every vote for every legislative issue. I mean, how are we ever going to do that? Well, now we already go to the polls every so often, and who even cares? I mean, people only care about maybe a select few laws about their actual lives that govern them. So they would vote directly.
The government would have to issue everyone a phone, and you'd have an app or something and all the laws to vote on. And it'd just be like getting rid of spam. People would just be clicking whatever, just get this out. I'm going to go about my day.
I mean, I don't trust people as voters anyways, but if people really want direct democracy, it's not like this pie in the sky utopian ideal where it's like, we could never it's easy. I mean, the government has social media now. It already tells people things all the
Mhm,
time, tweets
mhm.
the news to them, legislative updates. I mean, people can vote on their phones or vote at a booth or something. It's not that hard. I mean, we have the DMV. Not very good, but it wouldn't be that hard if you wanted to go in there every week and vote on some silly law.
Right.
Same
Yeah. I
thing
mean,
could be done with legislature. The
uh,
legislature could just go to their office, vote from there. Don't even go to the Capitol.
yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Really?
that's one of the things. Sorry, people don't realize how many laws get passed in America each day. I cite it in the book. I think it's like, there's thousands of laws passed every year in DC that are added on to our law books, and people don't realize how much they have to be involved with all that and how much we're expanding as well. You
Yeah, I
know,
was
there,
going to say something similar. Really, the idea of legislation is kind of in opposition to actual law, whether you think that's natural law or divine law. But this idea that we have these legislators, they just pass laws. They just make rules for us. You touch on it in the book. That wasn't really the way people conceived of things in the Middle Ages.
right, yeah, and that's on the written constitution part. We're basically removing ourselves as the authority and giving it to some written document that's protected by the federal government and their judges to decide what that document tells us to do. And by having the law, them above us, you're right, it's anti-law because they're destroying the law, they're manipulating, they're changing it, they're adding to it, which really there is no law because it's under constant evolution and constant change. And it is the opposite of the medieval idea of laws from the past. And man does not change it. There's the laws of the people or from God that have come about through the centuries. And any man who tries to change it is a tyrant himself, an anti-law, and he's against the law. And now it's like anything the federal government declares as a law is considered law, and we're supposed to be obedient to it. And so the law is obviously not ours, it's the federal government's now. And we're now under that law, which is now being used to abuse us instead of it was meant to protect us from being abused. So the whole thing's flipped around, the perspective of law.
I think there's an interesting etymological thing here, if I'm remembering correctly. The word law has a Germanic root, and then the word like legislation or legal comes from a Latin term, which is kind of fitting
Yeah,
considering the impact of Roman legalism.
that is interesting, and it would make perfect sense, as Roman law and legislation came back to kings and parliaments during that 14th century, whereas before you had the Germanic law, everything's set in stone. Um, so yeah, that's pretty interesting.
I've also heard from some, what would I say, libertarians, and I believe it would be they're kind of legal visionaries about anarcho-capitalist beliefs, but there's some who maybe even founded Prospera, which is an anarcho-capitalist zoning area in Honduras, I think. Might
Hmm.
be.
I think it was Mexico. The last person
No,
I spoke
no,
to.
not
No?
Mexico.
Oh, that
Prospera's
must have
not
been
in
something
Mexico.
else. Oh,
I can't remember the exact state or
I think it would
country,
be
yeah.
Honduras. We can look this up real quick. I can look
yes,
it up.
Is this an
Honduras.
ANCAP thing or like
Kind of, yeah.
It's a
It's
libertarian thing. Reason TV had some
libertarian?
special on it, however many years ago.
Why do they hold
yeah.
it in like not the United States? I assume like most libertarians or
Well, yeah,
anarcho-capitalists live in the United
libertarians would
States.
love that, but it is in Honduras because they got the zoning because Honduras is poor and
Oh,
they needed
yeah,
some
okay, that makes sense.
benefits.
Yeah.
They needed
Yeah,
some
no.
benefits to get ahead, so they have the anarcho-capitalist zone that they're also trying to destroy right now, but
Whoa, whoa.
they're
Like,
they're
where is
basically
this at?
allowed to pick any legal system from around the world and go by
Wow.
that, which is very ahead of itself. Only other place that really does that is maybe Dubai and certain other select maybe tiny city states or something. But that's very ahead. A theorist who worked on that also believed in reverse legislation where the people aren't allowed to vote to make laws, but they are allowed to vote to get rid of laws.
Oh,
So
I like that.
that would be their habit. So they would just be constantly trimming the fat that gets
Yeah.
created by legislators, which would be great. That
I,
would be,
yeah, I'd like to see that with a president too, that the president can't do anything to push legislation, but he can veto it, write it off. Like the Confederacy gave their president more power to shut some of the legislation down, and it'd be nice to see a president that can only be kind of conservative or reactionary.
Got
there it is.
Prospera pulled up on Wikipedia right now.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
Prospera
it's on an
Zede.
island.
Venture
Yeah, must be
Officially
really
capitalist.
pretty.
Prospera Zede.
Yeah, it's on an
Zede.
island. That's
You know,
Charter
awesome.
City.
basically, there's a Mr. House fighting socialists with an economic zone in Honduras right now. So
Right.
So they're trying to get rid of this?
Yeah,
yeah,
the
there's like
socialist
a lot
government.
of socialist legislators in the
Oh, socialist.
legislature,
Yeah,
which
okay, that makes
are
sense.
actively trying to do away with the project, and they've sort of bogged it down.
Yeah,
I
they're
mean,
literally
Honduras
calling
needs
it,
though. They need
they're
money.
trying to call it a banana republic, is what they're trying to accuse it of. But here's the great thing about
Isn't it a banana republic though? Like, isn't that explicitly revolved around like natural resources and
Yeah,
stuff, and not
it's revolved
necessarily
around natural resources, and it's also
Yes,
like
I don't think
it's
that's-
corporation
Yeah, I guess
owned.
foreign influence. Yeah,
It's
foreign
socialists who
influence,
don't understand economics.
definitely.
They're just saying that there's a capitalist entering their country, so they're calling it a banana republic project.
And the funny thing is that it's not even one company that owns the entire like Prospera Zede. It's that they literally let like locals of like neighboring areas sign on if they want to join it. And that's the only way that they incorporate territory is
I
by
bet that's
locals
the
signing
problem.
on.
I bet
Yeah.
that's what they despise is people
They
have
hate that.
opportunity other than what they're
And it's
providing.
making the locals like super rich because they're getting all these like foreign tourists who are really interested in liberty, who want to move there, and they're doing basically all the futuristic stuff. They have like, pay with Bitcoin, legal systems from all around the world you can pick from.
Wow.
You can go by like most taxation systems even. Like you don't even really need to pay taxes properly. You can pay it, I don't know, like in Switzerland. You don't even have to have an income tax there. You can just pay
Wow.
whatever
They
form.
don't have an income tax in Switzerland? That must be great.
I don't know about the income tax around the world, but
Well, I know
whatever
the income
taxation
tax here is
system you like
disgusting.
most.
It's so high here. Like, I remember looking up a statistic yesterday in class. I swear, like, the income tax said like 23% or something. Like, it was something really, really high. It's just what
Yeah.
I Googled.
Yeah, and then when you
Yeah.
buy things, it's also another 7%.
Right.
Yep,
And
another
then when you want to
7%
buy a
tax.
house, it's another 10% or however much.
Where's this
Register
money
your
going? At
car.
least in
I
Canada,
mean,
they say where it's going.
Yeah.
At least, but in the United States, they don't say where it goes. I wish they were to do that.
Then
Yeah.
property tax.
Like in Canada, like I'll be driving down the highway and it'll say like, "Oh, your tax dollars at work," and it'll have a billboard saying where those tax dollars are going toward. Although obviously it's not like the most effective and like perfect system, but at least that's generally where it's going. Like in the United States, it doesn't say where those tax dollars are necessarily going.
right.
Back when I was a basic libertarian, I supported having a checklist sent to your house for like controversial policies you want to put your tax dollars on. Like, I don't want to fund abortion. I don't want to fund
Right, yeah.
contraceptives. This, that, the other.
Of course, the government would use that as an excuse that they could tax you against your will. I mean, they already do, but they'd say, well,
They
you could
could-
just check it
well,
off and
you
say
know.
you're paying towards something else, and we'll use someone else's tax dollars.
Smart idea, I guess, get them to say, that's your social contract. That's what you signed. You said you didn't want to pay all these.
Yeah.
But then I guess I could just mark them all off. No, 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 no.
I like Joel Salatine's idea that I mentioned in the book of being able to choose where your tax dollars go. So if you think of federal agencies performing well, or you want money to go there, and that create that competition among the different federal agencies, they'd have to produce. Some of them would just drop out because that'd be an actual, real, more democratic form of taxation instead of an oligarchy that we have now, where the corporations and politicians decide instead of us.
I mean, that's pretty true. I mean, I was, again, with the neo-reactionary stuff, I was listening to Mencius Moldbug, Curtis Yarvin, and he was saying, well, there are libertarians who want to get rid of these bureaucratic legislation organizations, and they technically don't even make laws, they make rules, and rules are
Hmm.
just, they don't pass anything, they just say it's the new rule,
Right.
and you have to go by that now. And he says, well, if you get rid of this, then it'll go back to the government and they'll make vague laws. And then it just gets decided by, uh, you know, men in courts,
Course. Yeah.
judges who have a prejudice one way
Yeah.
or another. And then he's like, maybe instead of regulating Elon Musk and, not causing ecological damage in Mexico, uh, in the Mexican Gulf or whatever, maybe, how much would it cost the government to just let Elon Musk write the legislation himself and just let him say what's going to happen? And the thing with that is it would be part of the formalist principle is that we're already decided by lobbyists and bureaucrats and, biased judges and, organizations that want to get their point across. So why not just sell it at that point? Why not just openly say it's up for bidding? Who wants
Yeah.
to lobby on it? Sold to the highest bidder, they can run all the laws on it. And then there would actually be a sort of form of competition, at least in some sense, because you can actually tell what the price is. By removing the prices to things, that's how they really get you. That's the issue with a socialist economy where they don't say how much bread is, how much labor is. They just say, this is what you'll get in return.
Hmm.
The same thing should apply with the government, where they should say, well, this is about how much Congress is worth. This is about how much it would take to lobby all of them in unison. So then you know the price. And yeah.
The thing I find most interesting about Curtis Yarvin's Formalist Manifesto is that it's largely a rejection of the practicality of the libertarian property ethic. So there's a part of the writing where he sort of just says, I don't want to pretend with these high ideals that I own myself. I just want to recognize that the government owns me and that I'm a United States serf so that we can
Hmm.
start making some sort of progress with like an accurate basis.
Yeah.
So that's just something I've always
That's
found interesting.
that's true. Yeah, I think people need to wake up and realize the situation they're in because a lot of people think we're free, and you're not going to do anything if you think you're free. I thought I was, 20 years ago, and I thought through democracy and everything is what made me free, and America was the land of the free. And if you don't really realize what is going on, um, you're not going to wake up from it. So if everyone admits and finds out they're a serf, and he's correct that you can then move forward with an honest assessment of things, but at the same time, that's going to be a huge awakening to people, and a lot of people I think are not going to put up with it, and they're going to, rebel or
Well, that's why
search.
we're on the fringes, is because a lot of people don't want to wake up to what the
Right.
reality is. I mean, they'll see Joe Biden on his, exit speech say, oh, we're a corrupt oligarchy controlled by bureaucrats and lobbyists. And then they'll be like, ah, that's terrible.
Like we
We
weren't
should,
before.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then they don't really want to do anything real about it. They want to, oh, let's protest, have a
Right.
revolt or whatever.
Right.
What
They're
are
kind
people
of
supposed to do about it? Because there really is nothing. Like I
basically
can't do anything
nothing.
about it.
Your vote is your voice, which
Yeah,
means
your
nothing.
vote.
But that's what
Yeah,
you're
your
told to
vote.
do is congregate with a bunch of other people, become politicians, part of the system, and
This
keep
is,
going. They turn
yeah,
what would be a rebellion into a support for some party, one way or the other.
this is the one thing I also like about the Neoreactionaries too, is because they recognize the Machiavellian school of politics
Hmm.
or realist politics, which isn't about, it's not focused on what your ideals are and what you want to happen. It's focused more on how does power actually work? What
Hmm.
is the real nature of power? And then, where do you go from that? Uh,
And
you could,
how to, oh,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
you could say it's idealist to say, oh, I want formalism or I want this or that. But it's very real. It's saying we are an oligarchy, so
Mhm.
we should just say it. We should just be
Right.
open about it.
And that's what a lot of my book is about, is trying to point this out to people that we're not free. Even by early America's standard or before the Civil War, if they came and saw us today, they would be appalled at what's going on. And that's why I use the analogy of a medieval peasant. He'd think we're all slaves or, under a rough form of servitude, or at least 98% of the population. But if you don't understand how other people have done governance in the past and what real true freedom is, you don't know that you're a slave. It's like the Matrix, where the guy takes a bite of the steak. He says, I know this isn't real, but it tastes delicious. And he's kind of just going to go along. He'd rather go along with the social norms or whatever, believe himself free. And I think a lot of Americans are like that they don't want to wake up. And it's a tough thing to do. It takes education, I think.
I think this is kind of another benefit of a sort of feudal system. Many people don't really want true freedom, but a sort of patchwork where you have a plurality of, maybe you have free city-states, autonomous communes, and maybe some areas that are more statist, where people can choose kind of what system they want to live under.
Right, yeah, and that's why we had that discussion, I think, a couple Patrick and Jason on maybe it was the first podcast where you were talking about dispute between two thoughts between libertarians, and one thinks they should force libertarian ideas on everyone, and the other one's like, no, I said that's a terrible idea because that's taking away their self-governance. Not everyone wants to be free. Most people want to live under some form of socialism, the way they've been raised at least. And they just want things taken care of for themselves, and they don't want to think about stuff. And so I wouldn't force libertarianism on anyone either. I think the best thing to do is seek self-governance that allows everyone to choose their own way to live. And then, we don't even have to talk politics or fight about it because no one's forcing their way on the other. And having that ability, like many people did in the Middle Ages, to move to a different lord, to choose different customs. If we had that today, like say we want to try some feudalism thing, say, Vermont adopted it as everyone becomes autonomous. Well, maybe that doesn't work out, and maybe we go to New Hampshire and they're trying something else. So the ability to be able to move and choose, I think, is the most important, as you said, and that a lot of people don't want liberty, and so they should have their own area as well.
Go live without your liberty and leave us alone, please.
Yeah, great. Yeah, if they want that, but don't force it on other people, that want liberty.
Yeah, that actually reminds me that in your book there's a section where you talk about how there's actually a significant portion of land in the early Middle Ages which was unfeudalized. And as I was reading that reminded me of the sort of like panarchist notion that everybody should be allowed to have their own sort of governance. And that's something that, by your account, historically is visible in the Middle Ages in a very real sense. That's totally invisible now. It's not present.
Right, yeah. Everything's controlled. I'm sure I want to look into some tribal Africa and Asia and see how some of those tribes are living, because I'd assume it's very similar to the Middle Ages, that are really remote and untouched by a central power. They haven't been conquered, or at least not in the last couple hundred years. And I can almost guarantee that they're living by their customs of their people, and it's a very free society. And maybe some of those areas you could, run off to, but I don't know how they'd handle outsiders as well. So,
are you referring to uncontacted tribe? What is it, Ken?
Are you all familiar with Somalia? I think it's kind of an interesting case study.
Yes.
There are some things about Somalia I know.
Yeah, it's probably not.
There's a couple of really great articles about Somalia on the Mises Institute website, but essentially their central government collapsed. And they're kind of in a state of quasi-anarchy now. But it is interesting. They do have their own customary tribal law, which is actually quite similar in many respects to English common law. It's very interesting.
I dug into especially some of the European tribal laws, but in the little that I've read about it, before Rome came about, and also you can include the Hebrews and the Bible in that territory, it seems like everyone kind of chose the same mode of living, which was that tribal custom laws, similar to the way the early Middle Ages are. So I would not be surprised at all to see that in any area that hasn't been modernized, I guess, or hasn't had some colonization from European powers that institute parliaments.
Yeah,
I know I'm working with groups in Aborigine tribes that are trying to overthrow the French and English colonization of their time. And they're using my book actually and teaching people over there using my book about decentralization and the tribal laws and getting rid of parliaments because they said, you know, we used to have a king, we used to have the tribal laws, we were free, we were taken over. And that's how sadly most of the world has been treated.
What's his Zir?
Yeah, Zir is the traditional legal system in Somalia.
There is one major state in Somalia, I believe. It's called Somaliland, but I believe the rest is anarchy. Yeah.
My understanding of what took place after the falling of the central state in Somalia for a period of years is that the idea that it became totally lawless is inaccurate because a lot of the legal functions actively went into the traditional Zir legal system. So it took that demand in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's actually very similar to like the libertarian idea of polylaw.
Yeah.
Really? Could you explain that a little? Because I'm not the most familiar.
Sure. So let me think. I don't know who originated this idea. Maybe David Friedman. I think he might be an advocate of it. But essentially, polylaw is where you can have multiple competing law systems within a single geographical territory.
Right.
I'm
familiar with polylaw. I mean, with how the Zir legal system relates to that. If you're familiar with that.
I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but essentially the different tribes kind of have their own interpretations. But then, so if there's like intra-tribal conflict, it's mediated within that. But then if there is intertribal conflict, then each, the defendant or the plaintiff or whoever, each person gets to choose 6 like jury members that are familiar with their like version of the law. And that's kind of how it is arbitrated.
Oh yeah, that's one of the best systems as well. It reminds me of the libertarian things I heard. David Friedman especially talked about it, where each side can pick their own lawyer. He said they can both pick their own lawyer, and then the lawyers will come together, pick the judge. And that's about as far as he talks about it. But 6 of your own jurors, that's also great.
That reminds me of American nullification, which has been totally done away with, almost entirely.
People talk about jury nullification where you're overgoing a law, but they never talk about jury guiltification where you're just falsely convicting a guy.
I think a lot of people, there's a lot of corruption in the American justice system that a lot of people don't realize. I remember I was talking to one guy, he was a lawyer, and he was telling me for some of these grand jury things where they're looking for an indictment, they'll just have the same grand jury go through multiple cases and indict people. And if the grand jury ever refuses to indict someone, they get rid of that grand jury and bring in a new one.
Oh, wow. So it encourages them to indict. Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah.
To make another connection to the Middle Ages, I don't know if you've been to that section of the book yet, Ken, but it talks about, I think under feudalism, where in the same town there'd be multiple laws because people would bring their law with them. And there's different sections of the same town, same geographical area that would have different sets of laws and customs. And there's a lot of people, when they moved, they took their law with them. So when they went to another town and they committed a crime there, they'd be judged by the law that they came from. And the judge would have to discover their law and figure out how to deal with whatever arose. But it sounds similar to what you were saying.
Yeah, in your book, you also mention how like the local lords or whoever would advertise to people that they can live under their own law, where they would have maybe like a Jewish section of the city where Jewish people could live under Jewish law. I think Walter Block talks a bit about that as well, where under poly law, maybe you have Muslims and they want to go live under Sharia law.
Right.
and they can still coexist with other people without forcing everyone to have to follow the same law.
Right, and during the Crusades, that happened too. When the Christians went to the east to retake the Holy Lands, they instituted feudalism there, and the Muslims were allowed to come join them in their customs or keep their own laws. So the Muslims, which were always a majority in the Crusader states, kept their customs, cut their laws, even under the Christian Crusader lords. They weren't seeking to eradicate Islam; they allowed them to keep all their customs. So yeah, like you said, certain towns would have like the Jewish section, the Muslim section, the Christian section, but very individualized instead of top down. It's the bottom up view of law that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. I was about to mention that right before you said it. It's a good system of law, and that's kind of how Prospera works, to bring that back in. That's basically what Prospera does. Dubai has been doing something like it. I don't know if it's as free. I don't think you can pick any country's legal system to follow. I think they actually have their basis would be like English common law or something as one.
Mhm.
And then they also have Islamic law as another rule. But it's
So
very
is there that
tricky.
there's that basic law for everyone, and then beyond that they're selecting, or how's
I
that
feel
work?
like they do have a. I don't remember this. Maybe Jason, you can look it up. Look it up, Jamie. But
Yeah,
uh,
I'm Joe Rogan's Jamie here.
I don't know much about
right,
Islam, so forgive me, but is there a difference between Islamic law and Sharia law? Or
Sharia
what is
law.
it? Yeah,
Well,
Sharia law.
there's different groups under Islam. Uh,
Yeah, there's the Sunnis in
there's a lot
China
of
and
different groups.
others, I imagine.
One of the most fundamental groups would probably be well, they call them Wahhabis, but a lot of people who are called Wahhabis in Islam, they prefer to be called, I think it's Shia. I might be right. I hope it's not Sunni because then they'd kill me.
Isn't
I'm
Shia,
just
I believe
kidding.
Shia or Shia is in Iran and Sunni is like everywhere else it's not Iran.
So
More or less,
The
yeah.
Wahhabis are Sunni,
Oh, so
and they're
Shoot, I'm done
popular in
for.
I think they're very popular in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, they're very popular in Saudi Arabia. Some people try and say that they're the state-backed religion of Saudi Arabia, but if I were Muslim, I'd probably be Wahhabi because it's more fundamental.
The history is really interesting. So Ibn Saud basically conquered Saudi Arabia by galvanizing. So he went to all these different tribes. They all had their own like Wahhabi priests or imams, whatever they call them, and he essentially galvanized them. And the Wahhabi different tribes, they helped him conquer Saudi Arabia. But then since then, the government has kind of been beholden to the Wahhabis a little bit.
Right, and the great thing about Wahhab was he just basically called every other group of Islam idol worshippers, and he just he was totally against all of them. Extremely fundamental. Definitely reminds me of how I am as a Baptist. It's pretty funny, the comparison.
was he
Uh,
considered a Muslim scholar, this person you're talking
I
about?
think he was definitely an inspiration because he was like a super conservative or fundamental figure.
Interesting. 'Cause,
So
yeah, most Muslim scholars, at least from what I understand, are from Iraq, but are usually like Iranian descent. Most
also,
of the years I hang
yeah,
out.
the Wahhabis are also very influential because they control Mecca, the Holy Land.
Oh,
So
yeah.
they were basically like, if you're not following Wahhabi practice, we believe
Yeah,
you're an
kind of.
idol worshiper and
Yeah,
you
you
may
can't go to
not
Mecca.
come to Mecca.
Yeah, you'll just not be let in. And you have to go to Mecca at least once in your lifetime if you're a Muslim
Right.
in order. Yeah, because
You're
you don't
one of the
have to.
pillars is that you're supposed to, if it's possible, like you're supposed to really try to go to Mecca at
Oh,
least
yeah, I mean,
once, I think. I don't think like it's actually required that you have to go for anything necessarily,
but it
but
has to be something really
you have
good
to
if you
really
can't get
try to
in.
go.
It's
Yeah.
basically like a commandment. Like,
Hmm.
you're supposed to go to church, but it won't save you, but you're supposed to. You have
Yeah,
to
like
try.
If it's literally impossible for you to go to church, it's less of a
If
deal.
it's literally impossible.
Hmm.
Exactly. And I found, did you get the Saudi, no, not the Saudi, but the Dubai legal system?
Right, I forgot to look that up. Dubai legal system.
Yeah, because I believe they operate maybe on the basis of English common law, but then you can go into other
The
legal
Google
systems.
AI overview says it's a mix of civil law, Sharia law, and common law, and that it's designed to provide speedy justice and resolve disputes without unnecessary delays.
This is
But I
Sharia law.
It
Sharia.
combines Sharia law as a part of it.
you
Oh,
type poly law after it and see if the Mises
Dubai
Institute
le-
comes up.
Okay.
poly law.
The Mises
Yeah.
Institute is always like my top resource for things like this.
Yeah, a
So
golden
true.
resource, really. I don't like to, Google AI overview. What do they know what they're talking about?
I mean, it shows the sources, I believe, with Google AI. Like you can look below
Yeah,
it and
they
it'll have
do,
like 2 or
but
3 sources.
You never know if
sometimes,
they're synthesizing it accurately.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah, 'cause
Sometimes they
it's
just
AI.
say,
So I mean, yeah, obviously don't use AI as your everything tool.
I know
Definitely.
you could ask, how to make a cake, and then it'll be like giving you the instructions on how to make a pipe bomb, and then you're like, "What's the source on this?" And it's some ironic Redditor online
Yep.
talking about that's how you
And
make
the
a
title is
cake.
How to Bake a Cake, and then yeah, below it is just how to make a
Yeah,
pipe bomb.
exactly.
I'm not
Google
finding
AI
any
is
of the
not
Mises
well
articles, unfortunately.
Oh,
Can't
well, they
find them.
definitely should have it. If you search up polylaw, it should still be there though.
Is it quoting Wikipedia as its source? Because most of the time it quotes Wikipedia.
Yeah, it does use Wiki a lot.
Which Wikipedia isn't that bad. To be fair, I noticed if you go to like more modern topics, Wikipedia can be a lot more unreliable because it's a lot more controversial.
If you go to
and people want to put their
controversial, yeah, controversial stuff too. I mean, as a neo-reactionary, I went on to the Dark Enlightenment Wikipedia page.
oh boy.
Went on there, I checked out.
Definitely.
It was going, like acceptable for most of it until I got to Nick Land, and then it's like
Oh, he's
it's
so
calling.
racist, right?
Oh yeah, he's
Yeah.
a super racist. He hates humanity as a whole, and they're like totally misreading Land. Like Land's kind of crazy, where he has quotes where it's like nothing human makes it out of the near future, and he has hyper racism. But that's basically like natural selection for space travel, not actual racism. He also believes in genetic engineering. So how do you even get that? And also with the anti-human stuff, like, maybe, I mean, sometimes I'm kind of anti-human too with how the world's going. It's not going the best. And I was kind of red pilled on, some anti-human stuff where, the flesh is weak, to be honest. So he has some great points about that. He's a transhumanist type of reactionary guy, cyborgs and all that.
So, Jeb, what
Yeah.
kind of got you interested in like medieval monarchy? I know you were influenced by Tolkien a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I love J.R.R. Tolkien, and I was writing a book on Tolkien, and I was researching what influenced his worldview and how he thought, because he thought different from anyone that I'd ever read before, and so I wanted to know what influenced him and what impacted Middle Earth, his creation. And so I was digging into a lot of the Anglo-Saxon stuff, and as I was reading it, it was nothing like I thought or had been taught the Middle Ages were like. And that's what created my interest. So it really started with researching Tolkien and his area of profession, the Anglo-Saxon England, and it just spread out to all of Europe. And I just kept gaining more and more information. And I've always, if I'm taught something a certain way and I find out that that's not true, that causes an interest in me. It happened with the American Civil War, and it happened with the Middle Ages. So that it was kind of both of those that drove me of discovering something was not how I was taught, and J.R. Tolkien.
I
So
know
is it,
there's.
wait,
You
can
go.
speak
You
first.
go.
So wasn't Tolkien mostly like a fantasy author though? I've never read Tolkien before. I've read a lot of books.
Yeah, he's known as the author of The Hobbit and Lord of the
Yeah,
Rings,
Lord of the Rings.
but he's also popularized for many people. I've run into a lot of bloggers, historians, a lot of lay people that were influenced by Tolkien because he presents political systems and good and evil, through his very popular mythology in Middle Earth, which millions of people have read. And he presents politics in a pretty clear, distinct way between what's good and what's evil. and he's anarcho-monarchist. He popularized in it, so it's a very libertarian anarchist form of kingship that the good people, the free people. Yeah, that there's a great quote from Tolkien that he kind of popularized, and especially the consent part. Like he made it clear forcing your ways on someone else is evil in his books, and that free people should be allowed to choose what customs they have and not force it on each other. So he has elves, dwarves, humans, hobbits, and they'll live in the same village or nearby, and no one's trying to force their ways on each other. They're all a live and let live sort of attitude, and they're all very libertarian. And then the evil forces, Zoran and Zoromen, are the ones that are kind of think they should control everyone else, and they want that power, they want the force, and it's basically, the modern state and democracy of gaining control of the ring, gaining control of political power to force everyone else under your one centralized form of governance. And so, and that's what motivated me, and also because a lot of his free people were based on the kingships of Anglo-Saxon England, which he loved, in the Shire and their political system. He was almost drawing directly from that time period. And I'm like, wow, this is an actual time and place. He made some adjustments, but I didn't know political systems used to be like this. And there's not all what I thought, monarchy or kingship was like. And so that's where it expanded from there.
This might be a bit off topic, but have you ever read or watched Frank Herbert's Dune?
No.
Oh, Dune. Yeah, that's a good. Obviously, I know their books. I've only watched their movies, and the movies.
I found that one. I found that one interesting for probably the opposite I found it exactly interesting for the opposite reasons the author even wrote it. He wrote it kind of like as an anti-messianic thing, as kind of like an anti-feudalist type of idea. But basically the story is basically there's space feudalism. There's also a little plot about how AI rose up against humanity and they got rid of those. So now people train to be like thinking machines and like supercomputers.
Yeah.
But there's space feudalism. There's all of these different houses that control different planets and trades, and they have their own customs, and it's pretty interesting. There's also some plots about messianic figures in it. That's especially seen in Dune 2, the movie that came out. I kind of would recommend, besides, they are being anti-messianic with it, but it's so cool at the same time.
They kind of portray this war, which I believe is over spices. I believe like the sports fight. They portray it very brutal.
Basically, in it, there's spices, which is the resource war. It's also kind of a commentary on the war in the Middle East as well over resources.
Okay.
But the spices are like how they travel from one system to another system. And without it, the whole political system just breaks apart if they can't travel between.
Right.
But, that's why it's also very valuable that they hold onto this position. But the very interesting thing about it is the way that political wars work is that there aren't really wars. There's basically just high up political assassinations, and with the combat in it, it's very medieval type, where it's only melee, kind of like physical combat with swords, not much in the way of guns. Although they do have them, they're not really used for one-on-one combat. There are explosions and such, but
Game of Thrones is another good story like that.
Yeah, it could be interesting as well. I mean, I
The
would
books
recommend
go a bit more deep, but the show is still good.
I was going to say, I watched the show. I noticed a lot of feudal aspects of their governance, but at the same time, it was just for entertainment, I think.
I'm pretty interested in Dune because I'm of course, neo-reactionary, techno-reactionary psychopath. I don't know, psycho.
I mean, I read all the books. I really liked the books. I think the movies were really well done. There is definitely an aspect of it that it's supposed to be a critique of some of that, but I think it does a good job of presenting how a hypothetical system like that could work as well.
I mean, you like it when a critique is kind of fair both ways, and either side could be like, this isn't really a critique. I kind of like this, actually. It's kind of like that Barbie movie they made where all the guys are like, no.
That was hilarious.
I'm just Ken, okay?
Yeah, there's something about teaching lessons, I think, in myths. You know, it comes across, people are less likely to reject it and more receptive to seeing it because it's removed from our experiences. It's put in a different avenue and people relate to it in a different way. And that's why I think Tolkien was trying to do in many different ways. Politics was just one of them. And I'm sure, Dune and these other guys are doing the same thing. And it's a good way to teach, I think. You can put a clear message through. It's not as muddled. It's not as gray. It's more black and white. And then you can look at our world and see where these things are occurring too. So it can affect your political stance by reading mythologies or stories, sci-fi, things like that.
Right. Even if they have a motive in their stories, some of the best stories are the ones where you can take away different perceptions on it.
Mm-hmm.
But they aren't explicitly forced on you by too much strong language.
Which is going to be tough to do too, from the writer's standpoint.
I mean, even with the Bible is very matter of fact about things done on both sides. It doesn't sugarcoat it much for either side of the story. Then you run into people like the Gnostics and people like that who are like, oh no, he's actually God's the bad guy of the Bible, and they go crazy about that. But it's like, well, the Bible's telling the truth at least. I mean, at least you have to give him that. So it wasn't a one-way narrative like, you'd find under like, Soviet Union information offices.
Right, yeah. So are you into sci-fi?
Very much, yeah. I do like a lot of sci-fi, but there's not much that panders to reactionary people.
Have you seen Firefly, the show?
Oh yeah, I've been very interested in checking out Firefly.
Definitely do it. It has some libertarian themes in there, and
I heard a YouTube review by there's this guy like a historian YouTube channel. He talked about Firefly being a piece of neo-Confederate. It's very neo-Confederate is how he was portraying it.
There's a couple of images. I don't know if you watched or if you showed the image, but you can almost see a Confederate flag come up like in the intro or what of each episode. But there's definitely like libertarian, and it's like you kind of had the rural outer planets against the centralized, strong military, strong government, and one's libertarian, one's for control, and there's that war, and those libertarian themes pop up, and even the colors, like they're called the brown coats, one side and the other one are the ones that wore blue. They're like the Union, and so
funny thing about that, funny thing about that is that a lot of Confederate soldiers were called, some of them at least were called butternutters, because their coats were literally a butternut color of brown, because they just didn't even have the dye to make it anything else. They just had butternutter color. And this also reminds me of a game that Jason was playing when we were doing space capitalism. Remember? What was that one? It was made by Bethesda.
Yeah, it's Bethesda's latest game, Starfield. I was playing that to get my head in the game for the interview with Walter Block about his book Space Capitalism.
And it had what was the group in it that was very cowboy and libertarian? At least
that's
supposedly,
a good question. There's a libertarian federation in the game, and it's explicitly libertarian.
Nice.
Yeah. Sadly, it kind of portrays them as like, podunk people who are just down the middle
it's
of space.
the Free Star Collective.
Yeah, I wish that game was more well done because it could have been Space Skyrim, but
that story could have been, very well done. And, same thing with my sci-fi issue is that when you get into sci-fi stuff, usually it's done by like, a lot of like optimist, atheist, liberal types, where they're more interested in, good one to put forward would be like Star Trek. Star Trek is very globalist and futurist and atheistic, kind of skeptical of things. Star Wars is more, middling. It doesn't really take a hard stance anyway, but, it's still between Galactic Republic and Empire. There's
Yeah, it
not
seems like
a
Star
bunch of
Wars.
feudalism.
Star Wars is kind of like, forgive me, because I've only watched a couple of the new trilogy at least. It seems like it's between a fascist-esque, like a very authoritarian government,
Yeah,
and between a revolting, like I don't know, a
Republic.
revolting conglomerate.
Yeah.
Yeah, Republic, I guess. Yeah.
And that's the way they portray it. But I also find it kind of funny because Star Wars is based on the samurai and feudal Japan a bit, which makes
Really?
it odd that
Wow.
there's no ounce of feudalism in the show at all.
I
Not
didn't
even
get
a
the
little.
feudal Japan.
I think
they
around
take-
from it.
It's from like their designs, like Darth Vader's
Oh,
helmet.
the helmet design. Yeah,
Uh,
I always got the Stahlhelm vibe. And
Also with
yeah,
the
definitely.
swords and such, that's based on the
Oh yeah,
samurai
the
battles.
lightsabers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, I just finished Shogun. I like that show, and it has feudal aspects in it. But that's the next area of study that I want to dig into is feudal Japan. I don't know if you guys know any good books. I was going to take a
Oh,
course.
yeah.
I have like 7 books on it, but I really want to study from medieval all the way up to where the movie The Last Samurai took place, where they really became modern and interacted with the West, like that time period.
Oh
You
yeah,
guys know
yeah.
much
Think-
about that?
Isn't the Assassin's Creed series the next game is supposed to be set in feudal Japan, I believe.
Yeah, I
Huh.
found that kind of interesting. One
Yeah,
of the
but
things
that
about
game has also been receiving a lot of criticism. You guys know.
I didn't know.
Is that the one that like really inflates that one African historical
Yeah, they
figure?
basically
Yeah,
tried to say
yeah.
that there was like this African samurai running around Japan.
To my knowledge, it's based on a real guy, but it's like they really amp it up with like the
There
fiction.
was
Also-
there was one in all of history, and he was like a feudal lord's bag carrier guy, and now it's like he was leading the armies.
Mm.
It's also very hard to incorporate into the movement when you're wearing a full set of samurai armor and you're like a 6'4" African trying to be
Yeah,
stealthy.
that was one of the things that really amazed a lot of people. They were very colorist in feudal Japan, and you can understand why. They never saw a guy like that in history, basically.
Yeah.
But with feudal Japan, I can only remember a Netflix documentary that went on pretty far with the history of the Japanese dynasties, but didn't even go through all of it. There's like so much history.
Japan as a state is pretty unique because it was competing with Europe in terms of its military power, but it really was kind of just surrounded by backward states that could not do like anything to compete with it, really. I think China was really its only threat, I would say.
That actually reminds me, a great thing about have you ever heard of the Neoreactionary Trichotomy? It's similar to the three estates of the medieval ages, but they believe that there were 3 different classes. Right now, they're kind of vague groupings, but there's the warrior class, the priestly class, and the merchant class, right?
Mhm.
And those were the 3 primary ones that held together a lot of feudal societies and
Yeah.
more decentralized societies. And it's the best way to combine any society. Other, perversions of society aren't necessarily as bad if they're, some type of, just one way. But there are some societies which are fascist, which are more in, the warrior class mindset. Libertarian be more, merchant class. They say, socialist or priest class, but that's only because they're very it's charitable minded, not necessarily that the government acts that way, but
Mhm.
that's what's in the minds of the people, what they're
Right,
focused
yeah.
on. And the thing about Japan is it incorporated all of those, but there's a 4th unspoken class, which would be the managerial bureaucratic class, right? And that would be more like ancient China, which, as we know, didn't make a lot of political progress in all of their years. They never really colonized. They never really went out because they were always focused on the bureaucracy in China, where it was a very centralized bureaucracy, and they had all these bureaucrats kind of just managing things rather
To be
than the
fair,
classes.
wasn't China was really prosperous during like before they were, I think, actually more economically rich than Europe during like
They
the
had a lot of
There was a
inventions.
time.
Yeah, there was a time when China was a lot richer, and
Mhm.
Europeans were trying desperately to get over there and trade with them.
They had a
So, I
lot
mean,
of civil wars as well, though,
yeah,
because you have
famines
to
and all
remember
that that
that.
killed
I
tens
mean,
of millions.
it's kind of similar to our modern day society. You just get to see what it's like in long term because they had civil wars a lot of the time when they broke up because they wanted control over the centralized empire of
Mhm.
China every time.
Right, yeah.
They didn't just like break up and say, okay, let's just some of us be Manchuria, some of us be this area. China has basically always been China. They always want to be China.
The problem is once that power is centralized, it's very hard to get rid of, you know?
Right, and that's
Um,
lasted for all these ages. It's kind of why they are more Chinese people are considered more conservative in the modern era. You know, even though they are communist, they still have a lot of conservative, historical, respecting beliefs. But that's because they've basically built up, a plague immunity to the bureaucratic classes where they can basically get over it and still be conservative, even though they're controlled by bureaucrats. They're
I think
shame focused.
in China's favor, I think there's something to be said about some libertarian currents in Confucian and Taoist thought.
Yeah.
I think Roderick Long wrote about like libertarian themes in Confucianism. It was pretty interesting.
I own the book. I never finished it, but his basic argument is that while somebody like Rothbard would pin Lao Tzu as being like the first libertarian,
Mhm.
Roderick Long would say that somebody like Confucius is actually much closer to like a classical liberal sort of proto way of thinking, whereas Lao Tzu is so like anti-economic and anti-urban in some ways that he's really not that libertarian in his way of thinking. Um,
Mm.
that's my basic understanding of the premise.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
That's another aspect of history I really am interested in. I haven't delved deep into feudal or world feudal histories or ancient histories, and the way you really get into that these days would definitely be by just reading straight from the sources and going
yeah.
through everything. They don't have the historical helps that everybody has for modern history, where
Mhm.
you could look up World War II historical videos and find 1,000 of them in whatever style you like, and it could be hours long, a couple minutes long, and tell you basically everything about and the political situation going on. But if you go into feudal history, it's like basically if people try and think about feudal history, they'll basically just jump over it almost completely. That's something I found crazy. If you look at history, everything between like 1 AD and 1000, it feels nearly just jumped over.
Dark Ages.
Maybe the fall of the Roman Empire, but
It
after
goes from
that,
Rome. We had Rome, and then we had the Renaissance, and in between, it was just the
Right.
Dark Ages, where they were just anti-science and
yeah,
superstitious.
nothing interesting going on there, no
Yeah.
political stuff going on there, just kind of, they're backwards, we're forwards.
And I think
Absolutely nothing happened between the fall of the Roman Empire and the treaty at Westphalia. Nothing. Nothing of importance.
Just cut
Yeah.
out everything between, fall of the Roman Empire and the Enlightenment, and that's our history.
Mhm.
Because they want everyone to think you've always been under a legislative branch. There's always been these people above you that regulate you. You haven't been free at any time or to select your own customs. And there's always been a central power controlling people. It's just which one, and we're better than that. So don't look at the Middle Ages. I think that's part of it for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot of aversion to the Middle Ages, and in some sense, I understand it because if you try to tell the Middle Ages, like all of the political struggles and conflicts going on within it through, the basic, oversimplified historian type
Hmm.
of perspective, uh, it'll take forever because
Yeah,
they were so much more individual. There were so many more polities
diverse.
going on, so much more diverse than what we have now, also. And also, something that a lot of religious analysts also miss is that the further you go back in history, oftentimes you'll lose a lot of documents and histories over what was going on in a specific area. So, a lot of atheists will also try and say, you go back to 200, and that's around the time we get our first full Bible. But,
Hmm.
really, it's like the full Bible probably came out a bit after, a bit after the church was formed. But
Hmm.
we, of course, lose stuff after 2,000 years of history. Especially if you're being persecuted by the government, you don't really keep it
Yeah,
all collected.
yeah. And part
So,
of what happened in the Middle Ages, why those documents were lost, is because the Vikings would target the monasteries because they had a lot of, treasure. They're also the scholars that are keeping all the documents and things like that. So a lot is wasted through war when you're specifically targeted. Um,
right,
there's a lot
yeah.
more there that we don't know about, of course.
There's a ton that we don't know about, unfortunately, and that's one of the things I'll definitely enjoy when I get to heaven, is looking at the real history of everything.
Yeah.
You
I
can
wonder if
have
we're going to
all
see
the
it in a
stats.
movie. That would be awesome.
Be awesome if there
The
was a
virtual
library.
I would love the full
Yeah.
encyclopedia of all of reality, please.
reality.
Yeah, download it into my brain.
Download like the Matrix. That's probably what it'll be
That
like.
would be great. I mean, I'd love to get the stats on everything. I mean, people love looking up random stats for everything anyways. Imagine all the, real ones you could get.
You're going to go to heaven and God's going to give you a library like 1 trillion times the size of the Talmud. It's just about everything.
Talmud is
It's
giant as
one
well.
100-mile long scroll.
It's about like that library of Babel that people made online, except, they cut off all the excess.
Mhm.
Just everything real. I'm gonna pull up the Neoreactionary Trichotomy chart because I found
Sounds
that
good.
so
So
beautiful.
the trichotomy comes from an observation that within kind of the new reactionary movement, there was these three different factions, and then someone else basically said, "Hey, these factions kind of roughly map onto the three estates model of medieval European society," and then there was kind of this whole theory that sprung up around that.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
mhm.
that
you
sounds interesting to read up on for
you can
sure.
see that in a lot of things, even if you're not looking specifically into the neo-reactionaries. If you ever look at like a political triangle, it'll usually show those three groups.
Mhm.
Hey, Jason, how do I pull that up?
There's a little green share button at the bottom of
Oh,
the
great.
Zoom window. Yeah.
Good point. I
Oh,
set my
yeah. I gotta
request.
allow you. There you go.
Oh, great. I have permission now. Here. I'll share this. Basically, there's these. Do I have this one on? Can you guys see it?
I'm not
It's a
seeing
black
anything.
screen for me.
Shoot.
For me, it just says Patrick Adams has started
Yeah,
screen sharing.
Here it
Okay,
is.
there we go.
There
it
we
is.
go.
Great. This one might be a little bit low quality. I'll try to get a good high quality image.
It's a bit pixelated, but I can still read it.
Hold up. There's the three telos model, which is somewhat like it, where if you have the freedom side, this is usually seen as how about we go here? This one of these might be better. Techno commercialist or techno capitalist. That would be more the freedom side, because if you look at libertarians, a lot of them are focused on the market, one, And two, a lot of them are focused on technology and progress because they're tired of development being halted,
Hmm.
all the regulations put on
Hmm.
building and such. So that would be the freedom side. Tradition, this one actually counts it as ethnicist and nationalist, but the reminder is that ethnicity isn't exclusively related to genetics. It can also be related to shared customs,
Hmm.
tribe, things like that. Even Israel has the 12 tribes, which could be considered 12 ethnicities. And then there's equality, which would be theonomist. And that might seem weird, where, you have theonomists who are, religious law. But if you look at a socialist and communist, you have to notice that they're doing it for a metaphysical, we just love equality. We just want everybody to be equal. And you know what? Just because I'm this crazy, fourth Abrahamic religion, Marxism. Because some people have also noticed this. Some people have called Marxism a neo-Abrahamic religion or
Interesting.
the fourth Abrahamic religion, Christian heresy of critical theory.
Hmm.
But the reason they say this is because Marx comes from a Jewish background, and some of that inevitably influenced his life.
Right.
And it's kind of like how you hear conservatives, they'll criticize the socialist and they'll say, oh, you guys just want to build heaven on earth. Well,
Yeah.
yes, literally they do. That's kind of the point. That's part of their metaphysics, their philosophy. It's that they want to build a heaven on earth where everybody's considered equal, even though that's not materially possible, nor is it even
Right.
desirable, honestly, even if it were possible.
I think
But
Yarvin also points out a lot of like puritanical roots of modern progressivism, and he argues that modern progressivism is also kind of a atheistic offshoot of Christianity.
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. I mean, I make that point somewhat in the Monarchy book that as people become secular, they fill in Christianity with a secular religion, and that religion will closely resemble the one that they overturn. So the secular socialist incorporates a lot of Christian themes without being Christian, without Christ. And I think that happens everywhere. Every population that becomes more secular will replace it with some form that has a lot of similarities to the religion they're just rejected.
Mhm.
right,
I think that's
right.
another reason why like the state is so antagonistic towards traditional religions. They don't want people to be with these traditional laws, traditional values. They want
Mm.
people to worship the state in
Yeah.
essence.
They want the state is the God. It wants to be the ultimate authority in declaring what's right and wrong and decide what gender is and economics and all that. It doesn't want anything that would compete. And if people truly have, if they're Christian or Muslim or whatever, they're going to put the Quran or the Bible above what a politician says, and they want to be at the top of the hierarchy. So,
You actually
That's
you bring that up in your book, and you talk about how the Roman Empire would have been more accepting of Christianity if it could have been incorporated into the pantheon,
right,
and if the
right,
emperor could have remained on top. And you
right,
draw a parallel with modern democracy where any given traditional religion is acceptable insofar as it doesn't breach whatever line is established by the democratic regime and prevailing ideology.
right.
So
Right, and how everyone's supposed to get along and view each other as long as you're a Muslim, but you can fit into that democratic mindset of what religion is supposed to be or Christian, and it's fine. But if you step out of that bounds, which Christians have done historically, that's where they have a problem, whether it's Rome or the modern democrat state.
so long as your religion's subject to the empire doesn't care.
Right, yeah, as long as it's below, for sure, it doesn't cause any trouble. It doesn't give any pushback to the rulers or say that they're above the rulers and they're they actually incorporate it. They like spirituality, I'd say, and they actually
Right.
endorse it in many ways through socialism, through, that's what a lot of the political movements, I believe, environmentalism, women's rights, a lot of that is to give purpose, to give meaning, to give like a spirituality to these people, but it's within the democratic framework of what's acceptable. It's actually boosting them and helping them. And they'd love to have Christianity, which they already do, a large part of liberal churches under their domain already. It's those that are resistant, like the medieval church, and that mindset of, Christ is king of all. He's above politicians. He's above any law that you do. That's where they have a problem. And I said that's why the Romans fed the Christians to lions, and they didn't like the Jews either because the Jews were the same way. Everyone else believed in usually multiple gods, and there's just another pagan, or another god from this local area, so he's equal with all of us, but the state's above all, so they can incorporate as many as them
Right.
as they want. It's not a threat in any way.
And that's something interesting about a lot of things. Us as monotheists, we're not used to the acceptance of or not used to just not caring about our own religion enough to be like, well, I mean, if you guys are Muslims, then yeah, we'll let it be. But not just because we love peace, but because even if you let, another religious group just honor your religion above their own, that's a form of assimilation. That's kind of
Mhm.
how they theorize that a lot of the pantheons got their multiple deities, for one, is that they would allow people to worship these other deities and then they would be integrated, and maybe a part of their culture influences the primary religion, but
Mhm.
uh, they still eventually become part of the religion no matter what, because they're trying to share a sort of metaphysics with each other.
Mhm.
Whereas, if you're in Christianity, there's no real acceptance of that. I mean, unless you're in there are very few groups which I could imagine allow in the type of polytheism like that. There's the Baha'is, who are the real fourth Abrahamic religion, technically. Uh, but they allow in a lot of traditional religious figures like Buddha. They believe in, some of the Hindu scriptures where they allow them kind of in.
Mhm.
And but they're all seen as Baha'is, and they're all just trying to go towards their one path and
Yeah.
so on. But they aren't very religiously strict, and neither were the pagans. That's why it's interesting. Tolkien was also closely related to C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis said that he didn't think of himself as a sort of atheist becoming Christian. He saw himself as a pagan becoming Christian, because his mindset was much more pagan than it was the atheist type, because atheism is just like it's like a revival of a lot of like old and dead habits from even before paganism, where paganism was much more on a common ground with Christianity.
Mhm.
Atheism is like, even pre-spiritual.
Mhm.
It has no real basis. It's like going back into solipsism, where you don't even have a foundation for reality on a lot of things.
Right, yeah. I was going to say, like, true atheism, I think, is very rare. And I think more people have a replacement religion. We can call it pagan or whatever it is, whatever they have. They have some form.
Right. It could be, a lot of people, they believe in, and I know this isn't talked about enough, but I really wish it were. There are secular religions or unofficial religions that are incredibly religious.
Mhm.
Like I said that one time on the
And
first
endorsed
interview.
by the state. I'll say that too. They don't
Yes,
care about
and
separation of church and state unless it's
right, they don't even
traditional.
have to, as long as they don't look like they're a church.
Right.
And that's the whole scam, because, if they were allowed to, I probably have no doubt even that they would have an Americanist religion where they literally worship America, because
Mhm.
a lot of conservatives now, that's what they basically do.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But
that's just a majority of Trump supporters now.
A lot of them are, yes, but even with democratic people, they don't want to focus it on America because they're more globalistic, but they worship progressivism.
Yeah,
And
their God's more progress, social progress.
It's basically still an American, primary rooted idea, but it's still progressivism is where it comes from. And they both have their own religions, and if we weren't living in say society weren't theocratic and it weren't also atheist, there would definitely be a pagan type of Americanist religion going on right now, reverencing the founders. And it's even said, I believe figures from around 1776 when the revolution happened, they said that if Washington weren't in this era of enlightenment and Christianity, he would be revered as like a deified figure to people. No doubt, because he had the ability to obtain power and he didn't. So that's like a religious virtue.
Yeah.
In about 100 years, there'll be an AI Americanist religion.
Probably true.
There's a lot that we can look forward to in 100 years. Another thing that I'm, very interested with Nick Land about. Have you ever heard of Nikolai Fyodorov, as some people correct me?
You introduced me to him.
Oh my gosh. We'll have to Nikolai Fyodorov pill everybody. It's so
They
hard
took down
to
that
find.
one video. I want
They
one
took
place
down
on
the
the
one
internet.
video.
I want one place on the internet where there was a really good video essay on the Russian cosmist philosopher Nikolai Fedorov, and it's just gone. Cannot find it anywhere.
Sadly gone. It was like 2 hours long, and it was so good because he was like a proto-transhumanist from the what year was he? Did he write his book, What Was Man Created For?
I can look that up real quick.
Yeah, look it up, Jamie. The year he wrote his book, What Was Man Created For? Because he was an Orthodox Christian, and he wanted to focus a lot of the new technology and beliefs coming out on maybe that can reveal something about Christianity and our thoughts on it. And he read the passage. There's a passage in the Bible that says, "Go out and resurrect the dead and heal the deaf and the blind." And I'm paraphrasing, but such and so on. But he took it literally. He was like, "Yeah, okay, resurrect the dead. Got it, Chief. We'll do that." And then his whole idea is, well, technology is getting so advanced that maybe we can resurrect the dead. And, if we could resurrect the dead, then what's everybody fighting about? What? Resources? Just be alive. You want to honor your ancestors? Resurrect them. You care about traditions? Well, who cares? Resurrect it. And then it's very interesting because, fascist, communist, all of it doesn't matter if you can just resurrect everybody and, who even cares? But he also believes, yeah, he literally wants to universally. That's one of the weird things about him, though. I've heard he's a Christian universalist type of guy where he believes everybody can be saved through resurrection. But, I'm not really one way or another on that. I think I'm fundamentalist, so, broad is the way that leads to destruction. So I don't really believe everybody would want to follow the path, but I do believe, if you can resurrect people and that somehow works out in God's eyes, then okay, I guess we got it going from here. And, I find it interesting because he also believes in colonizing the universe.
I was going to say, it's going to get pretty crowded if you start resurrecting everyone.
Right. And the interesting thing is there's a part of the Bible that says your seed will be as numerous as the stars in the sky if you can number them. And there are a lot of stars in the sky. And you might think, well, if there's that many seed, then, how much area is that going to take? There's a lot of stars, so we're going to probably need it.
We need to colonize all of them.
There's
I
going to
know,
be a
even
1,000-year-long messianic kingdom according
right.
to the New
There's going to
Testament.
be
So there's going to
there's
be
going
some
to be
time.
right. I brought this up to you,
Yeah.
Jason. The millennium reign is 1,000 years, and if everybody's resurrected and they're all reproducing and they're not really held back by resource constraints, and it's also a very fundamentalist society, then what do we get out of that? Maybe a birth rate of, let's be generous, say only a birth rate of 4 kids per group. Then you exponentially multiply that over 1,000 years, which is, be generous. Say they only have kids every 100 years. That's like, what, 10 generations? After a certain amount of time, exponential increases are huge. I was talking to an atheist about this.
Yeah.
They're like, how can there be this many people after Noah's Ark, just filling up Egypt and all these areas? And it's like, well, they had nearly perfect genetics and they're all exponentially multiplying over this time. So, and then it ended up with like, I don't know, 100 million people or something around the time I ended, which is totally big enough to fill the ancient world at that time, which makes sense. So, over, let's say only like 5% of historical people get saved.
Mhm.
That's still like, what, 500 million people or so? And then they're multiplying over 1,000 years. That's not starting off from 2 people or 8 people. That's starting off from 500 million people. Huge. You need to fill the stars. So he was very influential, Nikolai Fyodorov, because it's like, you don't really hear Christians talking about, well, we're going to colonize space. A lot. I've even seen it as like, God created space just as like an ornament, just for us to look at. But we're staying here forever. We're dying here, no matter what.
I've
We're
seen a
never
lot of
leaving.
I've seen a lot of people saying that since if any aliens exist, they're not created in God's image, so they're demons, and we have to colonize them.
Maybe, maybe.
So what do you guys
Actually,
think about Trump saying they're going to plant a flag on Mars?
oh yeah.
Did
I
you
think
hear
that's
that?
Sounds good.
Right? There's part of that I think that's good societal enthusiasm, but then also having read Space Capitalism by Block, you could also make the argument that there's a reason the market's not doing that, and so
Yeah.
having the government do it would be inefficient and it's too early.
Yeah.
But
But
I was gonna say that's a
Martian
lot of
exploration
money.
is still just good objectively, I think. So
I
But
still,
imagine-
there's a lot of things to be done with space. I mean, colonizing Mars would be big. Elon Musk wanted to do that years ago, but we never did. When, makes sense. It's funny also because, the guy who did the rockets for America, right? The German scientist, I forget what his name was.
I'm not sure who he is.
Was it,
Yeah.
well, it might have been Heisenberg as his last name. I remember that much. But he said we would. It's actually crazy how he might have even, prophetically predicted this. He said a man named Elon would colonize Mars, which is kind of weirdly prophetic. But
Really?
Was it
yeah, it was in one of his writings.
Heisenberg or was it Werner von Braun?
Probably Werner von Braun. Probably, yeah. But he said maybe a man named Elon would colonize Mars, and that might be going forward. And with America right now, I'm kind of just happy that we're not in the middle state. The Bible says be hot or cold, and I say if we're going to be an empire, then be an empire. Do empire stuff, colonize Mars, take Greenland, Canada, Panama, colonize Mexico, take that too. Do all that. If we're not, then, I want to be decentralized. But if we're not going to be decentralized, I don't want to be boring now.
Yeah, we're gonna harvest material from stars and build McDonald's on Mars.
Ideally, we'll get there. I mean, they have one every 5 miles. It's funny. Somebody said there's no McDonald's in Greenland, so we can't even take it. We shouldn't even take it. So they're not worth it. But, we're going to build McDonald's in Greenland every 5 miles.
Mars needs a superhighway.
Exactly.
True. It's true. there is a serious lack of Walmarts on Mars.
Yeah,
We're going to build exons in space for rocket ships to refuel.
that's actually, Walter Block gets on that, refueling stations in between and homesteading orbital paths. And I think that, if we do colonize space, that's a very good look forward towards maybe neo-feudalism. That could be possible. I mean, it'd be like a new American colonization, except I don't even know how to rank it, though, where, if you were colonizing America early on, high likelihood you're going to die if you're the first guy to do it. If you're colonizing Mars, I also feel like there's a high likelihood you're going to die, but I don't know what the comparator is.
I'm pretty sure the standard expectation is still that whoever's going to Mars is staying there. The first people to go there will not be coming back. So,
right, yeah.
The thing I
probably
worry
a
about,
death sentence for the first few trips, at least.
It's kind of scary because there are so many, things about our bodily designs that we don't even account for, that if we lived on Mars, we very much would be made aware of. One thing is that if we send people to live up in the ISS, one thing we notice is when they come back, they feel very feeble, fragile, messed up, loss of muscle mass, because our bodies aren't designed to be sloths who float around in low gravity with our bones just floating apart the whole time. So if we did get to Mars, there's a small gravity differentiation there as well.
Yeah, it says Mars is 1/3 of Earth's gravity on Google. So
yeah, so it'd be not as bad as space, but still could mess us up a bit.
I wonder if we get to a point like in Firefly when they go colonize a new planet, they gas it. They spend, they do it for years and years to make it habitable before people move in.
That's actually
people do that on really small scales, kind of like almost like a greenhouse at a larger scale.
In my opinion,
all of Mars is going to be colonized. It'd be one little section that we're able to put people on that could maybe grow their own food and things like that.
My opinion, I think the most profitable way to go forward would probably be space stations that are made specifically habitable for human beings. You know, how they have the ring that spins around to simulate gravity. That would be a big deal. That could make us feel a lot more accustomed. It'd basically be, artificial structures we make just to keep ourselves out there. That's another thing that I was talking about with Nick Land, hyper-racism. He believes basically it's only going to be some of the richest, smartest, and most physically capable people that are going to colonize space, which is, this might be, pessimistic for some people, but only, a lot of the best people are going to be going into space. We're going to get a new, aristocracy that's going to be colonizing space.
I don't know if rich and physically capable overlap that much.
I know, I was thinking that same thing. Sports athletes, maybe.
Usually, well, when I say physically capable, I don't necessarily mean strong. I mean, like, genetically modifiable, people who are going to be more accommodated to the space climate.
Okay.
Think astronauts and people like that.
You're saying we aren't going to have spacesuits designed for, 300-pound people? Come on, man.
Well, I mean, yeah, we could, but the people who are going to do best in space are going to be the people who require the least. It's kind of like, in the modern era, we see a lot of old traits popping back up that were kind of killed off by natural selection, like, asthma, eye problems. I'm not biased here, right? Asthma, eye problems. I have asthma too, so
autoimmune conditions are increasing.
We have a lot of conditions that are now subsidized by technology. That they
obesity
aren't
is an
big.
Issue now and not a sign of status.
Right. Obesity is also an issue because the medical care subsidizes that. You don't need to get out as much. But if you go into space, it's going to be kind of a reversal of that, where, yeah, they might have the technology for some people, but it's going to still be, if you can just go out in space without even any need of a spacesuit, then yeah, NASA's going to love you. Every space organization will love you, and they're going to want you to, lead all of the colonies. They'll subsidize your genetics to go out and colonize.
They'll patent your gene code.
Yeah, patent your gene code. that's where you get the hyper racism from, where, some people would just be better at, colonizing space. So there's that to look forward to, of course. And if we do get genetic modification, then we don't even have to worry about the scary moniker of racism that's on that. We would just, inject a DNA update or something.
Your Neuralink will accelerate certain hormones.
Your Neuralink will just speed up your DNA process or whatever. Very esoteric, technological stuff we're on right now. But
I suppose that's just a generally interesting topic, like what role technology, space steading and seasteading included would it play in establishing a sort of neo-feudalistic order?
Yeah,
AI
medievalist.
discovery age.
That's
Yeah.
what I was just on. If we colonize all these places, maybe we'll have a chance to start over, whole new systems and
True,
how
we
that
could have
go
a chance
about.
to
I don't
start
know.
over. And
It'll be
something,
maybe the future form of decentralization, different planets, because Earth seems to be going under this one world government almost.
it's kind of scary because America, something notable about us is that we were a colony, but we were also a chance to try new forms of government, right? And that gave us the ability to be a lot more free than continental Europe was becoming at that moment, where they had began, restricting people further and further. Eventually they get the Reign of Terror, which was terrible, but America never had to deal with that because we were allowed to make a lot of our own laws, and we became independent, and we colonized westward, and eventually we also colonized back east, and now Europe is basically our puppet states.
It used to be that Europe had to immigrate here, not
Right. And
us there.
and now we colonize east, and we have a lot of it under control now, but still the state is back to centralizing worse than it even was back then. So even if we did colonize and get a neo-feudal thing going on in space, that's very optimistic because, one, it's not based on flawed principles like, a lot of American democracy and the Republic was. There were some flawed principles included and Enlightenment ideals. But if we did do that, the odd thing is going to be the sad thing about neo-reactionary political theory that is truthful is that the people who want to be left alone are usually the one who lose compared to the ones who want to conquer and get victories.
Right.
So if we did colonize space and we get a colony and we ever get to American level status, if these people in 100 or 200 years are listening, take advantage of your position, neo-feudalize the earth, do it while you still can. Don't let their ideas get to your head. Have a conqueror mindset, at least in that regard. If you're a freedom imperialist, that's bad in the sense that, not everybody wants to be free. But if you're getting rid of tyrannies, that's great. And I don't care. Continue, go about your way. If there's a tyranny based on unconsenting individuals, I don't have any preference for them.
Yeah.
One day they build one too many dominoes on Mars and they decide to revolt.
It's true. And dear all future Martian serfs, do not make the same mistake Europe did. Stay a feudal Mars.
Indeed. Don't fall for a reign of terror.
It's true.
Jeb Smith, did you have something to say about what I was on about?
No, I think I asked my question.
Yeah, where I was talking about colonization of Earth again by the neo-feudals and freedom imperialism.
Yeah, I think it was just related to the planets, and it's much more difficult, obviously, to colonize a planet than to take over a continent. So that may allow for more diversity that it's not worth taking it over. I think I cited a manual in the Middle Ages, and they were talking about how castles somewhat did that. It became too costly to take over an area that had a castle that it wasn't even worth it. I think if you had a certain, a planet libertarian ideas or whatever, they may be able to maintain it, at least from outside forces, as long as they don't fall from within, which will probably happen at some point. But I think
And then
there'd be less fear of, like in America coming and taking you over because it just wouldn't be worth.
the great thing about history, in some sense, is the cyclical or rhyming nature of history. So
Mhm.
we know, I have a strong feeling that feudalism will make a comeback, as it's more than just a fad in history. It's very much a defining era throughout all of history. I mean, even incrementally between empires, there was
Mhm.
feudalism. Even before the Roman Empire, there had been feudal type governments that were going on. So even after the American Empire, I believe that space could become a feudal landscape.
Yeah.
And this thing you're saying with castles, if we do have privateering for Mars and the moon and such places, if we get that, then we'll see neo castles where it'll be a new brand of castles, which are going to be a lot more interesting because, one, you could have a small castle size type of area, but it would have like its own Israeli iron dome, a bunker system. It could have a ton of different features that would make it more impervious to invaders, which would be
And
great.
and further, like I mean, there's all conjecture, but if you have the whole planet and you haven't colonized the whole planet, but you have only the section you have so well guarded, if they come take you out, they're going to destroy what you have already, and that's everything that they could benefit from if, whatever your defensive system. So they're taking the rest of a bare planet, which is not going to be worth it at all for them to make that travel, do the military effort to do it in the first place. So.
Right. A good metric would be to make sure you always keep your defenses up. And
Hmm.
so then, I mean, I'm a bit of a, this might sound funny to some people, but I'm a simulation gamer. So I play this game RimWorld, and a thing about that is, or you could know about that, is that you don't want to raid anybody who has good defenses, who has a good guarding squad. If they're poor and they have good enough defenses, not worth it at all. So
Right.
same
Yeah.
logic applies to castles and space castles or whatever we want to say about those. You don't want to invade those. An interesting thing about this too is that castles were kind of like the big thing that I imagine in the future for space would probably be bunkers, because bunkers
Mhm.
operate a lot in the same logic as like how a spaceship can, and how we already imagine we're going to have to colonize. It's unlikely you're just going to have a shack that you just have on Mars where you go out, you go to your shack, you have a farm next to it. You're
Mhm.
just in your spacesuit the whole time. You sleep in your spacesuit. You're probably going to be living in a domed area or a sealed off area for a bit, at least, unless it's terraformed, where a bunker would make sense, where you're deep down in it and you only come out every once in a while for resource
Right.
gathering or
Right.
this and that.
I've heard they
So,
want to nuke Mars for an atmosphere to be formed.
Yeah,
right, Elon
Elon
Musk.
Musk's talked about that, nuking the poles. And Neil deGrasse Tyson said it's not that silly, so can't be that silly.
We need to
Right.
send all of our bombs to Mars
Could
immediately.
be, that's actually a great use. That's actually what Nikolai Fyodorov kind of talked about. He said that cannons are used a lot. Cannons and bombs are used for the purpose of war. They're an invention for war. But even back in his age, they started using cannons to make artificial rain, where if you shot at a cloud in a certain way, it could cause a ripple effect where it would begin leaking all of the liquid in it and start a rain, right? Because of the liquid coming out of it, and it's disturbed. So he said it's a weapon made for war turned into a weapon made for peace, to help people, to feed people instead of killing them. So it would be great to take the nuclear weapons we have now, and instead of
Mhm.
blowing each other up into oblivion 80 times over, we could just use that to blow up Mars 80 times over and make an
Pakistan,
atmosphere.
I know you hate India a lot, but you don't need to nuke them. You need to send it to Mars.
Yeah, blow up Mars instead. So then you can make a colony on it.
That could very well be how King Jesus liquidates all of our nukes when he comes.
That'd be a great idea. Yeah. Just use them to terraform. And I mean, there's a lot of things that we make for war that are then used for great peace efforts. Nuclear scares people, but it's one of the best forms of energy that we could have right now would be nuclear energy.
Well, wasn't microwaves made for war, but then they ended up using them just to like heat up pancakes and shit?
Yeah, that was part of an inspiration. Yeah, it was wartime. Funnily enough, the Slinky was made by a guy during World War II, but he's like, this would make a way better children's toy than
I wonder what its purpose was.
I
War
think it was
definitely
like,
war drives innovation more than anything else because your life is threatened.
oh
And so,
yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, I don't like war obviously, but the technologies that we discover as we're trying to invent better weapons then translates often into like medical or somewhere in the civil sphere.
yeah, a lot of statists try and bring up, well, the government invented the internet during a war, but yeah, that's what they do. Of course they do. They invent a prototype form of the internet during the Second World War, I believe.
Wasn't
Where
AI created during the Second World War as well?
maybe if you count maybe the Turing test, but there are,
Yeah.
it really depends on what you consider an AI throughout history. There's all types of algorithms that can simulate human intelligence. But
Kind of hard
another,
to get a common definition because everyone sort of means like specifically generative AI when they say AI nowadays. They
yeah,
don't really reference like I don't know. There are even some forms of generative AI like uh, what's the application you use for Grammarly? Like Grammarly is considered a generative AI, but people don't even generally think of it as one because it's not creating pictures or text for you in the way that
Right.
like ChatGPT does.
Google
right.
Translate has existed for a long time. I think
Mhm.
like 10 years or longer.
I was on the AI bandwagon even before people figured out they could make pictures with them and talk to them. I was interested in a lot of that before people were even thinking about that. For a long time, people were saying AI is never going to take off because it's just so stupid. It's so terrible, it could never take off. But they got close enough and it did, and it's taking off very quickly. There were people who were skeptical that the singularity could happen by 2040 something. Now it's like, well, yeah, maybe it'll happen by 2030 at this point with
Yeah.
how quick everything's advancing. I mean, they say that DeepSeek, the Chinese AI,
Yeah.
wiped out the stock market.
Yeah, $1 trillion or something like that.
DeepSeek itself didn't do it, which is a misconception. What happened was investors saw how good DeepSeek was doing as an AI, and everybody was starting to reinvest and pull their stocks out of all the other AI companies. So there's a lot of mix-up that's going to be happening, and
AI might be the next big driver of innovation.
oh, definitely, it's probably going to be. Nick Land said nothing human makes it out of the near future, and the reason that is because AI, if it takes over and gets smarter and smarter and smarter, inevitably it's going to take over every human job and do it better, and it'll be that'll be basically humanity continued would be like AI. That would upgrade people to get along with it. It'd basically be like, turning us into advanced components of itself, and
Cyberpunk, but ugly.
could be beautiful, could be neo-feudal. But the one of actually Nick Land is very interesting for this concept. Here's an argument for what the oldest AI could be: capitalism. Because capitalism is not itself, it's not human. It doesn't care. It's not a method you follow. It's an intelligence of itself. It's a combined intelligence. Where as capital accelerates and gets more efficient, it gets better at managing resources and gets better at managing society even. So capitalism can not only influence a market, but it can influence the people the market affects as
Right.
well.
For sure.
So it molds us just like how we mold it. It's symbiotic.
That's interesting.
He's a very interesting guy. I would definitely recommend him. He got into some weird occult type of things, but incredibly interesting guy because it kind of is good to study some occult things when they're so mind changing about things. He's inspired by what was the author for Cthulhu?
Lovecraft.
Lovecraft. Yes, he's inspired by Lovecraft, and he believes that capitalism is kind of like an uncaring deity, a blind deity that doesn't really care which
Yeah.
way things go. It just progresses itself
Yeah.
more and more and gives and takes from whoever.
Right.
So it's incredibly interesting, and it has also made its way into my spiritual type of beliefs because it's so incredibly interesting. He had a great political piece that I would recommend to you, but I don't know where you would find it. It was called The Dark Enlightenment. He wrote a long article on that. There's an audiobook of it that's free, but I like reading the physical versions because you actually read it and take it in. It's called The Dark Enlightenment, and he also made another book that Ken sent me called
I think that's actually on my
Xenosystems.
list. I think you might have recommended that to me before.
Yes,
I
he
think
also
that I
made
put the audio on my. I will listen to audio once in a while, and
he also
so
made
I don't even find it.
Xenosystems. Xenosystems has a lot of tidbits in it as well.
On the topic of all this technology talk, a pretty prominent theme in your writings, Jeb, is a sort of, I don't know if you could say like preference for agricultural society and a sort of not demonization, but like weariness of urban and
Yeah.
industrial society. And I wonder how you would have that perspective um, adapt to any sort of like what would allow for neo-feudalism given the current technological state of things. If you have any thoughts on that at all.
Well, technological advancements, I mean, I think to get anyone excited about the potential of what they can do and how they can benefit us. And so what I'm what I'm more concerned with looking historically is how self-sufficiency and libertarianism is affected by the Industrial Revolution and technology and what people did through politicians did through education, especially to remake society and force everyone into their industrial urban society. And that had a lot of political consequences. So most people throughout history have lived in a very free, localized agricultural um, setting, and that allowed for libertarian policies and for self-government. And so the Industrial Revolution and urbanization really regulation really took that lifestyle away. So it destroyed the politics. That's where I'm more concerned with is how it affected the family, culture, and politics. But as far as technological advancements, they're great, and I'm all for them.
Mm-hmm.
And an urban capitalistic society definitely is beneficial to those advancements, whereas the sort of politics I like in localization is not. And that's one of the admitted downfalls to my preference of my political preferences is that they won't help innovate technology the way our current system does.
Right. And something I noticed about technology is funny thing about me is I seem like a super technology nerd type of guy, but I actually I actually understand people who are like Ted Kaczynski for some of their perspectives because technology has invaded society very quickly, and it did cause a lot of turmoil and strife, uh, for good and for bad. there was a lot of social bad that came with it. But when I was thinking about some of Nick Land's ideas and how he's kind of he's, you know, somewhat of a post-humanist or transhumanist in some areas, but I think about him and I thought, well, one of the reasons that technology has been an issue for us is because naturally, as human beings, or even as biological creatures, the natural instinct of our flesh is to do less, get more, do less, get more, do less, get more. And that's kind of a capitalistic type of, you know, optimization process, right? To do less and to get more. But the thing about it is that if we replace what we have with something more mechanical, more designed to be productive, basically we can trade around our whole incentive system. Progressivism would die in like a day, because if your whole incentive system in your brain is rewired to just be focused on duty and do more, get less each time, then you would be an evolving person that gets better and better. And it'd be funny. It'd be like super reactionary. It would go further than the feudals even. We would be so reactionary, it would be unimaginable, oddly, which is an odd thing to think about. You know, you think about technology, you think, you know, progressivism and weird desires of people to do things with their bodies. But if you turn around the incentive system, you can totally reinvent humanity to be, you know, more conservative than people in the Garden of Eden, even, you know, because they would have a reverse incentive system. It would be it's kind of like what Nick Land calls reverse entropy, which would be, you know, everything's getting worse and worse and worse and worse until at one point it's kind of swirled around and the whole trajectory just changes to where everything's just getting exponentially better. So that would be kind of what would happen with a singularity, where we would just get more and more conservative because we would want less and less. I mean, think about as like a policy issue. This might be controversial for YouTube, but, you know, LGBTQ and feminism and all of these beliefs, and, you know, anti-colonialism, maybe. I mean, you can still be anti-colonial. I don't really care. That's probably not related to reactionary or progressive, but, you know, LGBT and feminism, that wouldn't even matter if you're just duty incentivized instead of pleasure incentivized, because, well, then you would have no personal desire to do anything against what your duty is. You would just be maximum productivity. So there is that. In summary. A long summary.
It's hard to summarize Nick Land's thought in just a few paragraphs.
It's incredibly hard to summarize Nick Land. I wasn't even summarizing him. I was just going on about a snippet of my own thoughts about him.
I'm doomed to not understand Nick Land for a long time.
Oh, I pray you do, because
it'll be a while.
I don't fully understand him. I tried to like look up his philosophy, and the terms are so. I'm not a philosophy major.
I know in one of his books he writes a chapter in like chemical code or something. Because
yeah, and then he also he has a he even has his own like Kabbalah number system.
He has a, you know, I'll try and find that. He has something based on the Tree of Life.
Numerograms, it's called.
Yeah, the numogram. And I've had people try to like give me a chart or books explaining the numogram, but even I'm like, I can't keep going. The numogram's too complex and it's so esoteric. So it's like incredibly hard to get through. But I still don't disincentivize checking him out because it's so worth it.
Here's Nick Land's numogram. I have absolutely no idea what's going on in this image. I have like a basic understanding of certain Kabbalistic concepts, but that doesn't translate to this at all. So
I believe Yeah, and this he talks about in his like summary of what I tried to understand. This is about how a lot of fundamental numbers relate to each other, which is kind of hard to understand. I think that it's saying 1 and 8 go together to, form some spiritual significance with 7. 1 also gives the identity of 1 to itself. So it's all very,
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
very,
it's already beyond me. I would
I
really need
know.
like instruction with a Landian or Land himself, because
Oh my gosh. I would love to get Nick Land on. He's in his 60s now. It's
I
crazy to
doubt we'd
think.
ever
He's
get to
60?
do that.
Wow.
He's
Yeah.
like in his 60s now. It's crazy to think because I think of him as such like a revolutionary author, and all the images you see of him are like him in his 20s.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But he's
Pretty-
like 60 now.
He's kind of more of a private individual, right? Because he has his Twitter, and I've seen him do interviews before, but I don't really think he likes talking to people.
I've seen
That's my
very rare
impression.
interviews.
I've barely seen any interviews. I don't think he talks much publicly.
And lately,
So you
he's
probably
lived.
won't get him on then.
Yeah, and I doubt it.
Unfortunately not. Even as much as I'd love to get him on, it would be sad also because I couldn't understand probably a lot of what he'd want to say. I've watched interviews with him, and a guy will ask him like some obscure question, and then within the first 3 minutes, I'm already out. I don't even know what he's talking about by that point.
We should just pay Nick Land to come on and explain the numogram.
You
Just-
should read, even reading like the first chapter of like Nick Land's Dark Enlightenment. He's like Shakespeare with all the jargon that he makes up. It's so amazing. I mean, it's probably the first time in a while, first time I've ever heard anybody use the term catalytics to refer to the economy and the study of the economy.
It's a Misesian term, actually.
It is a Misesian term, but like nobody really uses it. But he did, and he just dropped it. And I'm like, what's catalytics? What, catalytic converter? What's he talking about? No, he just drops it. And then, he drops, techno-capitalist, which is his own little hyphenation that he made, which was amazing. He also, Theonomist wasn't his own thing, but he also talked about that. Spandrel's a big author in the realm as well. I think he's kind of given up on neo-reactionaries. He made an article called Post-Mortem for Neo-Reactionaries because he thinks the movement's dead. Little did he know, we all just showed up. We were late. Because I'm a pretty new neo-reactionary. I mean, the neo-reactionaries, they were kind of a movement that popped off more in the 2000s and maybe early 2010s was their, heyday. Now they're just, it's mostly just unqualified reservations and things like that. It's sad that a lot of the big leaders in the movement think that they've already died out, but they haven't. They can be pessimistic at times. But if I do recommend an author to read, if you want to understand Dark Enlightenment and neo-reactionary in a human sense and get the gist of it, go Curtis Yarvin.
Yeah, I mean, Dark Enlightenment is on my to read list.
Right. Go Curtis Yarvin, check out some of his blogs.
Yeah.
But if you want to get, crazy, esoteric, and, wild, mind blown about a lot of things, but, in the sense that you're going to have to work to understand it, you can go Nick Land.
You can get a lot of good, like, I wouldn't say basic, but much more comprehensible, like post-libertarian, neo-reactionary analysis from Yarvin. But Land is just so far removed from, like if you've read the least bit of libertarian theory, you can read Yarvin and a lot of it will make clear sense, or at least most of it. But Land requires, I imagine, a significant amount of preliminary reading. Like you need to know a lot before you can really understand Land in a lot of capacity. So
I didn't even know what the meaning of the word noumena was before I was reading it. I was like, what's a noumena?
Oh, did you read Bane of Noumena?
I was reading a bit of the section you sent me in the the xenosystems, and I believe he brought up the term noumena at one point. And noumena is like, how do you even describe that? It's like transcendental force, kind of like deity, but not exactly.
Let's look it up. I don't know
Noumena.
what the proper definition is.
Thank goodness. I'm not the only one who doesn't know.
A thing as it is in itself, as distinct from a thing that is knowable by the senses through phenomenal attributes.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing author. It's kind of like when you have to read the King James and you check like an old dictionary. It's like reading reading land, and you have to check a modern dictionary, and then you also have to check people online for what he means by a word.
Then you only have to partially trust everybody you ask. Because I've heard multiple people explain land to me, and I feel like they've all gotten something slightly
Oh my
different, like
gosh.
fundamentally slightly different.
So many of them just contradict each other. It's kind of like how people use Hegel. Like how people say, no, Hegel actually meant this, but really Hegel, meant this or that.
It really
People
is
can't
kind of
tell.
similar, because you have left accelerationists and right accelerationists in the same way you had left Hegelians and right Hegelians.
Yeah, because Land used
And
to be.
Land's around still. He's still alive
Land-
on Twitter. So
Yeah, he's still around, and he used to be left wing. He used to be like a Marxist, and he wrote a lot. Funny thing is, he wrote a lot of the same ideas even back when he was a Marxist. But now he's a reactionary, and they've shifted maybe. His writing style shifted like what, 2 inches or something? I think it's kind of like Dune in a sense where, before he was writing the truth, but in a pessimistic way. Now he's writing the truth in an optimistic way. Where he's like, yeah, let's get it. Nothing human makes it out of the near future. Let's go. Pretty interesting, really. I would love to have a whole just land reading session with half the people on here.
Land
with
Book
anybody.
Club.
Yeah, a land book club, because it's so deep. So deep. I can't even get it on my own. I probably could use other people to keep me from being self-deluded by reading it myself.
True, perhaps.
That's like if you read Shakespeare for the first time and you don't know what half the words mean, so you're just like, sounds like something I know already, but let's keep going. You have a totally different narrative than everybody else who's reading it.
Yeah.
True. I am thinking we should probably draw this to some sort of wrap up sometime soon. So if there's any final thoughts anybody has, or
there's a storm coming in here in Vermont. You guys are starting to break up already on.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Sorry. I've had some issues too.
Well, Smith, you're the featured guest. So is there anything you'd like to end off with, or?
Just thank you for introducing me to a lot of new thoughts. Let me on again. It was nice to talk with people who've read my book and have similar thoughts as I do. I want to dig into some of these other authors as well.
Maybe we really should schedule a Land or Garvin reading and a discussion.
I would think of something like that. I'd like to have more group discussions with Smith or anybody. I don't know if we can have a group discussion with Block or something. Maybe both. We can have Block and Smith.
That
at
would
the same
be amazing.
Time.
Yeah.
I don't know. But without further ado, I mean, if that's it, are we done then? Is that the end of this conversation?
Does anybody else have anything else they'd like to say? Is just
everyone watching, go buy it. Really interesting.
True.
I'm going to enjoy finishing it after this call.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing book, really. Mad Cow, do you have anything to say if you're there?
No, I think it's pretty good conversation.
Golden Freddy approves.
Yeah.
And Ken, if you have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to email me, or I'm sure you could contact through these guys. And
I'll get your contact info.
Awesome.
All right, I guess we're done.